At 2:47 in the morning, the Mirador casino floor was the quietest place in Las Vegas. The cards were boxed, the chips were counted. The chandeliers hung dark over 40 empty blackjack tables. Under table 9, a 6-year-old boy was asleep on the carpet, his thumb tucked against his cheek, a crushed juice box flat beside him. Then the most feared man in the city walked across the floor. People called him the House. In 11 years, no one had seen him forgive a debt, raise his voice, or take off the jacket he wore like armor. He stopped at table 9. He looked down at the boy for a long moment, and then, slowly, he knelt. He slid the jacket from his shoulders and laid it over the sleeping child. A security guard started to speak. The House lifted one finger. "No one hears about this," he said. No one understood why. To understand, you have to go back 3 weeks. To a name even he never thought to suspect. Before we go back to where it started, do me a favor. If a story like this matters to you, about what a person is worth and what one man is willing to lose to do the right thing, don't watch this half. Stay with it to the end. The last 5 minutes change everything. And tell me where you're listening from. Drop your city and your local time in the comments right now. I read every single one. If you're new here, subscribe so the next story finds you. Imani Carter could deal a hand of blackjack in her sleep, and most nights on 4 hours of it, she nearly did. She worked the graveyard shift at the Mirador because the tips were better and the questions were fewer. The floor, at 1 a.m., had its own weather. A low hum of slot machines, the click of chips, the recycled cold of air that never saw the desert outside. Her hands moved on their own, cards sliding across the felt in clean arcs, chips stacking in towers she never had to look at. She was 28 years old and she had the steadiest hands on the floor, and everyone from the pit bosses to the regulars knew it. She needed them steady. She owed 214,370 tenors. It wasn't her debt, not really. Her father, Marcus, had built it one bad night at a time over 4 years, borrowing against dice, money he didn't have from people who didn't forgive. First, it was a few thousand. Then it was a car. Then it was the kind of number that stops being money and starts being a sentence. When he vanished last spring, the debt didn't vanish with him. It found her. That was how it worked at the bottom of this city. The men who lent the money never lost track of the family that remained. A daughter with a steady job was collateral that walked in on its own 2 feet. So she dealt cards, and she counted the months. At the rate she was clearing it, a little off every check, the tips that didn't get reported, the second shifts nobody else wanted. She would be free in 6 years and 4 months, assuming nothing went wrong. Something always went wrong. There was also Micah. There was always Micah now. He was 6, and he was her sister's son, and 18 months ago, Daniela had gotten sick fast and died slow, and Imani had signed the papers in a hospital hallway that made her his guardian, without ever once making her feel like a mother. She loved him with a fierceness that scared her. She also could not afford him. Both of those things were true at the same time, every single day. And she had learned to carry them the way you carry water in cupped hands, careful not to spill, never quite able to set it down. Table 11, 1:15 a.m. A man in a wrinkled suit had lost $11,000 and decided it was her fault. He'd been drinking since the steakhouse closed. He called her names that the cameras caught, and the pivot boss pretended not to hear. Then he flicked a chip at her chest. $100 chip, hard enough to sting. Imani didn't flinch. She gathered the cards, squared them against the felt, and smiled the smile that gave nothing away. "Would you like another hand, sir?" she asked. Her voice was warm and level and completely out of his reach. That was her gift. People threw their worst at her, and she absorbed it without letting it become hers. She had learned it young, the way some people learn it, because somebody had to stay calm in that apartment. Somebody had to be the still water when her father came home, lit up and loud. And it was never going to be the adults. By 9 years old, she was already the one holding everything up. She had simply never been allowed to put it down since. The man muttered something and stumbled off toward the cage. Amani flexed her fingers once, then reset the shoe. What she did not know was that 2 floors up, behind a wall of dark glass, a man was watching her on a monitor. In Las Vegas, they called Do Hyun Seo the house. It was the kind of name a city gives a man it cannot read. He owned the Mirador, the 2 towers beside it, and a quiet share of half the strip. He was 33. He had never been seen to laugh. He wore the same charcoal suit in a dozen identical copies and moved through his own building like a temperature drop. In the 11 years since he had taken over, no one could remember him forgiving a single debt. And the legend held that the house always collected, because the house was him. He had inherited an empire the way you inherit a disease. His father, Seo Young-ho, had built the Mirador with money that came from rooms Do-hyun was never allowed to enter as a boy. Rooms with no cameras where men signed nothing and owed everything. When Young-ho died, the empire nearly died with him, drowning in obligations, circled by lawyers and lenders, and rivals who all smelled the same blood in the water. The man who saved it was Do-hyun's uncle. Seo Kwang-soo was 59, soft-spoken. With reading glasses, he was always losing on top of his own head, and a habit of bringing pears to the office because his late brother had loved them. He would set them on the corner of Do-hyun's desk without a word, the way you leave an offering. After the funeral, when everyone came for everything, it was Kwang-soo who sat across the table from them for 9 straight days and nights, and walked out with the company intact. He had raised Do-hyun through the worst year of his life. He was only person on earth Do-hyun still called family, and Do-hyun called him Samshon, uncle, the way other men say a prayer, quietly, and only to the one who has never let them fall. It was Kwang-soo who handled the parts of the business Do-hyun was trying to leave behind. For 2 years now, Do-hyun had been quietly cleaning the company, closing the back rooms, ending the old arrangements, dragging the CEO name toward something his children, if he ever let himself have any, would not be ashamed of. He had moved, more than once, to shut down the collections division, the one that bought up debts like Marcus Carter's for pennies and squeezed the families left holding them until they broke. Kwang-soo had stopped him each time. Gently. A hand on his arm, a tired smile, a pear turning in the light. Not yet, his uncle would say. That division was your father's, Dukuna. It is the last thing of his we have. Don't be in such a hurry to bury him twice. So Dukyun had waited. He owed the old man that much. He owed him everything, and a debt to family was the one kind of debt the house had never learned how to collect on. He did not yet know what waiting would cost. He noticed the dealer at table 11 because of how she handled the man in the wrinkled suit. Everyone who worked for Do-hyun handled him a certain way. They lowered their eyes when he passed. They sharpened their voices when he was near, performing competence, performing loyalty. They wanted him to see them being useful, or they wanted very badly not to be seen at all. He had grown used to being a thing people performed for, the way a camera is a thing people perform for. He had almost stopped noticing it. The woman at table 11 didn't perform for anyone. Not the angry gambler, not the cameras, but not the empire that owned the felt she stood behind. She just stayed herself. Exactly the same weight of calm whether she was up or down, whether she was watched or not. And when he came down to the floor later that night, walking past her table close enough that the air should have changed, she glanced up, registered him as one more tired person at the end of a long shift, and went back to her cards. She looked at him like he was a man. Nothing more, nothing less. Ha, 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 Alec. He could not remember the last time that had happened. It was almost 3 in the morning when he found out about the boy. He had taken the service corridor behind the cage, the way he did when he wanted to move through his own building unseen, past the linen carts and the hum of the ice machines. The door to the staff break room was open a few inches, the light inside low and yellow. Amani Carter sat at the plastic table, still in her dealer's vest, a stack of overtime slips in front of her, and a calculator she was too tired to use. She wasn't crying. She was just doing math with her eyes closed, the way you do when the numbers are the same, no matter how many times you run them. And, asleep across two pushed-together chairs, covered with her jacket, was a small boy. 6, maybe 7. One sneaker had fallen to the floor. His face was turned, toward her, toward the sound of her breathing, the way children sleep only when they trust the person nearby. Do-hyun stopped in the dark of the corridor. In his hand, without thinking, he had been turning a single black poker chip over his knuckles. A habit older than the company, older than his father's death, a thing his hands did when the rest of him had nowhere to go. The chip moved, and then it stopped. He stood there longer than he meant to. He did not know the boy's name. He did not know that the woman owed his own company to 214,377 or that somewhere in the city, the man she was about to fear most was already 3 weeks into using her. Niod. That night, Do-hyun Seo decided to buy something at the Mirador. It would be 3 weeks before Imani understood what it truly cost, and the price would not be money. The letter came on a Tuesday, hand-delivered to her apartment in an envelope with no return address. Imani read it 3 times standing in her doorway, still in yesterday's clothes, Micah eating cereal behind her and narrating something to the dog he did not have. The letter was one paragraph on heavy cream paper, the kind that costs more than a meal. It said that the debt held in the name of Marcus Carter, a principal, and accrued interest, $214,317, had been purchased in full and marked satisfied. She owed nothing. There was no signature, just a small embossed mark in the corner, the Mirador. Most people would have wept. Imani felt the floor tilt under her, that lightness, that first hot rush of "it's over." And then she felt something colder move in underneath the relief and settle there. Nobody erased 214,307 as out of kindness. Not in this city. Not for a graveyard shift dealer they had never once spoken to. A debt like that didn't disappear, it changed hands. Money that size doesn't evaporate. It gets moved, and it always moves towards someone who wants something. Whoever held it now would come for a payment she couldn't see yet, and the not for a payment she couldn't see yet, and the not knowing was worse than the number had ever been. So she did not weep. She fed Micah, dropped him with the neighbor 2 doors down, found out where the man's office was, and went to ask him the price to his face. Getting to the 47th floor was not something dealers did. There were card readers and a private elevator, and a woman at a desk whose entire job was to make sure people like Imani never got this far. But she still had her badge, and she still had the particular physicist who has already lost almost fearlessness, a person who cannot be lost almost everything and cannot be threatened with much. And by some combination of nerve and timing, and a shift change at the security desk, she was standing in the doorway of his office at 4 in the afternoon, before anyone thought to stop her. Do-hyun looked up from his desk. He did not seem surprised. That, more than the office, more than the view, more than anything, unsettled her. "Miss Carter," he said, "you know my name. I know everyone's who works for me." She crossed the room and put the letter on his desk, face up, and slid it toward him across the polished wood the way she'd slide a losing hand back to the box. "What do you want?" she said. It wasn't a question. You don't spend that kind of money on a stranger and call it charity. So tell me the real number. Tell me what you actually want from me, and I'll decide if I can live with it. Do-hyun had expected gratitude. He always got gratitude. People wept in this office. They reached for his hands. They promised him loyalty in voices that shook. Gratitude was a currency he understood completely and did not respect at all because it cost the giver nothing and bought them safety. He had not expected this. A woman standing very straight in a chain store coat, refusing to be relieved until she knew the cost. "I don't want anything from you," he said. "Everyone wants some things." She held his eyes without blinking. "That's not cynicism, Mr. Seo. That's just what I've learned the hard way, more than once. People who help you for free are the most expensive people there are. The bill just comes later, and you don't get to see the total until it's due. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He was aware, distantly, from somewhere he didn't examine too closely, that he had not been spoken to like this in 11 years. As if he were a man who owed an explanation, not a house that owed nothing to anyone. The debt was predatory, he said at last. My company should never have held it. Canceling it isn't generosity, Miss Carter. It's correction. You don't owe me thanks, and you don't owe me anything else. He paused, and something in his voice changed, went lower and more careful. You can leave your fear here. It's the only thing I'm keeping. She studied him for a long moment, the way a dealer reads a table, not the cards, the people. You really believe that's going to make me feel safer, she said quietly. That you'll just decide I'm free and it'll be true, because you said so, because it's always been true when you say so. She shook her head, almost and gently, almost with pity. You've never once had to wonder if someone was lying to you, have you? You've been the man people are afraid to lie to for so long that you forgot there's a difference between quiet and honest. Everybody's quiet around these. That's quiet around you. That's not the same as anybody telling you the truth. The words landed somewhere he kept locked, somewhere that had not been touched in years. He said nothing. He had no answer that was both true and safe, and he was too honest with himself to give her one that was only safe. And she saw that, too. Saw the flicker cross his face before he buried it. And something in her own expression shifted. Not softer, exactly. More careful. The way you look at a thing you had mistaken for a wall and just realized was a door, standing slightly open. She left without another word. She thought that was the end of it. She was fired 4 days later. The floor manager was a man named Doyle Prentice, Balak. He'd worked the collections side before he worked the floor, and he had the particular instinct of men who survive by reading which way the wind is about to blow. He'd heard that the boss had canceled a dealer's debt. He'd heard whose, and he did what men like Doyle do when they sense the ground shifting under someone above them. He moved to bury the problem before it could grow. He wrote Imani up for a chip discrepancy that never happened, produced a witness who owed him a favor and a shift trade, and called her into the pit at the busiest hour of the night so that the humiliation would be public and permanent and impossible to walk back. Camera doesn't lie, sweetheart, he said, loud enough for 2 tables to hear. You're short $40. That's theft. Clean out your locker. Amani stood in the middle of 100 strangers and felt the old smile come up, the one that gave nothing away. And this time it cost her everything she had to hold it. $40. 40. After they'd erased 200,000, they were going to end her over 40 invented dollars in front of the whole floor, and there was nothing she could do that wouldn't make it worse. She did not know that Doyle answered, quietly, off the books, to Kwang Soo. She only knew she was out on the strip at 2 a.m., with a cardboard box under her arm and no job and a 6-year-old asleep at a neighbor's apartment 2 miles away. It was Kwang Soo who fixed it. And that was the part no one would understand until much, much later. The old man called her personally the next morning. Warm, apologetic, a little breathless, as if he'd rushed to the phone the moment he heard. He had reviewed the footage himself, he told her. There was no discrepancy. None. Doyle had overstepped, badly, and will be spoken to. Her job was hers again, effective immediately, with back pay for the shift she'd missed. He was so sorry this had happened to her. He hoped her little boy was well. Did he need anything? Children needed so much these days. Amani thanked him, dizzy with relief, near tears for the second time in a week, and hung up believing she had finally found the one decent man in that whole gleaming building. She had it exactly backward, but that was still weeks away, and by the time she understood it, understanding would cost her more than the debt ever had. The ice broke when it broke because of Micah, Alec. Her sitter canceled on a Sunday, and she had nowhere to put him in papers she had to sign to be reinstated. So she brought him to the empty conference floor and set him up at the end of a long glass table, um, with a box of crayons and a promise of ice cream. Duyun came through on his way somewhere else, saw them, and slowed. And Micah, who feared nothing yet, because no one had taught him to, held up a drawing of a lopsided black rectangle standing on 4 stick legs. "It's a house," Micah announced with the total authority of a 6-year-old. "But it's a nice house. It has a dog." Doohyun crouched down to the boy's level. From across the room, Imani went still, and she saw the exact moment the man she'd called a wall forgot to be one. She saw him actually look at the drawing. Not glance. Look, and then ask, with complete and genuine seriousness, as if it were a matter of business, what the dog's name was. "Chip," said Micah. Doohyun took the black poker chip from his pocket, turned it over once between his fingers, and set it on the table between them like a gift, or a promise, or a card laid face up. Imani watched her nephew and the most feared man in Las Vegas fall into a quiet, deadly serious argument about whether a dog named Chip should be brown or black. And she understood, with a small sick drop in her stomach, that she had been wrong all along about the most dangerous person in her life. She had only been wrong about who it was. Marcus Carter had been hiding for 11 months, and in all that time he had never once tried to contact his daughter. He told himself it was to protect her, to keep the men who wanted him from following the thread to her door. The truth was simpler and worse. He could not bear for her to see what he had become. A soft, frightened man in a cheap room, jumping at engines in the parking lot. A father who had traded his daughter's whole future one hand at a time and never even had the courage to tell her. He was living in a motel outside Henderson under a name that wasn't his when the men finally found him. They didn't hurt him. Not that night. They came to offer him a job. They knew he was Imani's father. They knew, because they made it their business to know, that Imani now had the attention of Do-Yoon Seo himself, and they wanted Marcus to reach out to her, to become a father again. To ask her the small, harmless-sounding favors a father is allowed to ask. What did Mr. Seo say? In private. Where did he go? Who did he trust? And when would this cleaning of the company finally be finished? Nothing dramatic. Just a daughter telling her daddy about her life. His debt would shrink with every answer. It might, in time, disappear entirely, as if it had never been. Marcus said yes. Of course he said yes. He was a weak man, and he had been weak for 4 years. And every single person at that table expected him to be weak one more time. It was the safest bet in the room. Then he went back to the motel, and he could not do it. He sat on the edge of the sagging bed for 2 nights with a cheap phone in his hand, her number typed 100 times, and every time he tried to picture the call, "Iman, baby, it's your dad. I've changed. I want to know about your life." He saw instead the thing they were actually asking him to build. They wanted to feed his daughter into a machine, slowly, using his voice as the bait, and turn the one good thing he had left in the world into a weapon aimed at her. And he had put her there. He had spun the whole disaster with his own 2 hands until it dropped her within their reach. He had failed her at everything a father is supposed to be. He had failed her at money and at steadiness and at showing up. He decided, alone in that ugly room at 3 in the morning, that he would not fail her at this. Not at this one thing. If it was the only thing he ever got right, it would be enough. The message reached Imani through the last person she'd have expected. An old neighbor, the apartment they'd lost years ago, passing along a folded note that a stranger had pressed in at a gas station, interstate. The handwriting was her father's. The handwriting was her father's. She'd have known it anywhere. It was 4 lines. "They're using me to get to you. Don't trust the ones who erase your debts easy. Trust the one who tells you the price. Take Micah somewhere safe. I'm sorry for all of it. Dad." She read it standing at the kitchen counter, the tap still running behind her. She read it again. Her father, who had disappeared for 11 months, who had never once called, had surfaced only to warn her Yeah. And there was a whole grief in that sentence she didn't have time to feel. Because before she could decide what on earth to do with it, her phone rang with a number she didn't know, and a voice that was not her father's told her, flatly, without any cruelty at all, which was somehow the worst part, that Marcus Carter had been found that morning and would not be calling anyone again. The glass of water in her hand tilted. It did not fall. It hung there, impossibly, a half-inch of tap water leaning against the rim, catching the flat kitchen light, and no one moved to catch it, because Micah was asleep in the next room. And there was no one else in the apartment, no one else in her whole life, only Amani and the tilt of the glass, and the exact frozen center of the worst moment she had ever lived through. Then, the glass righted itself. Water ran cold over her fingers and into her sleeve. She set it down very, very carefully, the way you set snack something down when your hands have stopped being your own, and then she walked to the bathroom and turned on the fan. And pressed a towel to her face so that her nephew, 6 years old and already down one mother, would not wake to the sound of the last adult he had left coming apart. Duhan came himself. She hadn't called him. She hadn't called anyone. But he'd had a man watching Marcus, quietly, for weeks, and the man had heard first. Back, he arrived at her door at 6 in the morning, holding nothing, saying nothing, and she understood from his face the moment she opened it that he already knew, and that he had come anyway, in person, at dawn, which was not a thing powerful men did. He tried to warn me, she said. Her voice was steady in the terrible, mechanical way it got when the alternative was screaming. The last thing my father did on this earth was try to warn me. He didn't do one right thing in 4 years, and then he did that. She pressed the heel of her hand hard against her mouth. And it got him killed. He got himself killed warning me. How am I supposed to hold that? He didn't die because he warned you, Du-hyun said, and he said it slowly, so she'd hear each word. He died because he refused to help them hurt you. Those aren't the same thing, Amani. One is a mistake a frightened man makes. The other is the single bravest thing a father can do. And he did it for you, at the end, when it counted more than anything else he ever failed at. She looked at him then, really looked, and asked the question she'd been carrying since his office, the question the note had put in her mouth. How do I know you didn't do this? You erased my debt, Easy. He told me not to trust that. He told me with the last thing he ever wrote down. You don't know, Du-hyun said. He didn't flinch from it. I could tell you I didn't, and it would sound exactly like a lie would sound, because a lie and the truth make the same shape in the air. He was quiet a moment, and when he spoke again, it was the most careful she'd ever heard him. But your father was right about the rule. Don't trust the ones who erase your debt easy. Trust the one who tells you the price. So here is the price, Amani. The real one. Someone in my own house is doing this, someone I love, and I'm going to have to find out who. And it is going to cost me more than money, more than I want to say out loud standing in your kitchen. That is what helping you actually costs me. I didn't tell you before because I didn't know it yet. I know it now. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years, maybe ever. She could feel that it was true the way you can feel weather changing, before the sky does anything at all. Then I'll tell you mine, she said, the real one. I don't know how to let anyone help me. I've been the one holding everything up since I was 9 years old, and if I set it down and someone drops it, I don't drops it. I don't survive that. I've watched what happens to people who let go and get dropped. I grew up watching it. So when you erased that debt, I didn't feel free for even 1 second. I felt like I'd handed you something I could never get back, and I've been sick with it ever since. She wiped her face hard with the flat of her hand, furious at the tears more than the grief. That's the truth. That's what I've got. Alec, that's all of it. For a moment, they stood in her small kitchen, the fan still running down the hall, two people who had spent their entire lives making certain that no one could see the weight they carried, and who had just, without meaning to, set both loads on the table between them in full view. I'm not going to drop it, he said. You don't know that. No, he admitted. I don't. Nobody knows that. But I'm going to stand where I can catch it. That's all anybody can honestly promise another person. He moved them that same day, not to a cage, though she braced the whole drive for a cage. He put them in a quiet building he owned near Summerlin, top floor, with a woman named Grace who cooked without being asked and looked after Micah like he was already hers, and had raised 4 children of her own into decent adults. Amani kept waiting for the walls to turn into bars, for the kindness to reveal its hinge. It never did. The door was hers. The key was in her own hand. When she tested it at 3 in the morning, quietly, alone, it opened onto an ordinary carpeted hallway and an ordinary quiet night, and she stood in the doorway, breathing the cool air, and understood, for the first time in her adult life, that she was being protected, instead of held. She hadn't known there was a difference. She'd never been given one. Micah adjusted in a day, the way children do when the adult they trust stops flinching. He decided that Grace's warm, bright apartment was the nice house from his drawing, the one with the dog, and he asked Imani, hopefully, over pancakes, if this was where a dog named Chip was going to live. It was Micah who asked the next question. 2, the small, ordinary, unbearable question that would send Do-hyun down a road he could not come back from. But that came later. First, Do-hyun had to learn whose voice had been on the phone with the men who killed Marcus. And when he finally pulled that one thread, it did not lead out into the city, into a rival, a stranger. An enemy he could hate cleanly, it led up. Into his own family. Toward the one door in the whole world he had never once, in 33 years, thought he would ever need to check. Micah asked the question on a Thursday evening, over a plate of Grace's cut apples, in the guileless way children ask the exact things adults have spent their whole lives learning not to say out loud. Do. Yoon had come by to check on them, the way he did now, most evenings, without ever quite admitting to himself that it had become the part of the day he waited for. Micah had climbed onto the stool beside him to deliver an urgent report. His dog named Chip, still imaginary, still fiercely real, could now do a trick. My mom's not here anymore, Micah said, apropos of nothing, chewing. She was good. Aunt Imani says the good ones go up. He pointed a slice of apple at the ceiling, matter of fact, a boy stating the weather. Then he turned and looked at Do-hyun with total, terrible innocence. Is your family good? Your mom and your dad? They're gone too, Do-hyun said. But you have somebody, Aunt Imani said you have an uncle. Micah swung his feet under the counter. Is your uncle a good man? The apartment went very quiet. In the kitchen, Imani stopped, the dish towel still wrapped around the glass in her hands, and did not move. Do-hyun looked at the boy for a long moment. It was the simplest question in the world. It was, he understood with a slow, cold clarity. The only question, the one everything else had been circling. He had been avoiding it for 3 days without letting himself know he was avoiding it, steering his own mind away from it every time it drifted close, because the thread he'd pulled loose from Marcus's death had led, impossibly, to a set of files he had not wanted to open, and had opened anyway. I don't know yet, Do-hyun said finally. It was the truth. And Micah, satisfied by honesty the way children always are, nodded and went back to his apples. Across the room, Amani set the glass down on the counter. She had heard the answer he actually gave. So had he. Neither of them said anything, but something had been decided in that little kitchen, and they both knew it. Malik. He had the files by then. He'd had them for 3 days. Meridian Capital Recovery was a name that meant nothing to almost anyone. A small collections shell, one of 40 such entities the CO company did routine business with, unremarkable on any ledger you cared to pull. Do-hyun had asked for its records the way you dig at a stone in your shoe, expecting to find nothing, expecting to be able to stop thinking about it. What he found instead was that Meridian had purchased Marcus Carter's debt a full 18 months before the Mirador ever touched it. That Meridian had bought and sold 400 other debts exactly the same way. Over years, always, the poorest families, always the ones who had somebody worth leaning on. A daughter, a son, a mother with a job that could be threatened. And that Meridian's true ownership, buried carefully under 3 stacked holding companies, traced back, in the end, to a single trust. His father's trust. The one his uncle had managed, alone, since the funeral. Mort. The one Kwang Su had begged him, again and again, with a hand on his arm and a pear turning in the light, not to close, because it is the last thing of your father's we have. Du Hyuna. That was the paper, and paper could be a coincidence, or a frame, or an honest mistake in a filing somewhere. Du Hyun told himself all 3 of those things, in rotation, for 3 days. Then his security chief brought him the recording. It was a phone call 16 days old, pulled from a device that had belonged to one of the men who had visited Marcus's motel outside Henderson. On it, a voice gave the instruction, calm, unhurried, to approach Marcus, to use him against the girl. And then, when Marcus refused, to make an example of him that the next reluctant father in the next cheap room would be sure to understand. The voice was soft. It was almost tender. It apologized in the middle of arranging a man's death, for the inconvenience of it all, for the mess, for the weather. And it called Du Hyun, my nephew, fondly, the way you'd mention a boy who'd gotten above himself, and it said that the nephew had gone sentimental lately, and that sentiment was a thing a wise man managed in others carefully, patiently, not a thing he ever indulged. Du Hyun knew that voice the way you know your own name in the dark. He had heard it read him to sleep, once, in the worst year of his life, when it was the only kind sound left in the world. He did not shout. He did not break anything, did not sweep the desk clear, did not do any of the things a man is supposed to do. He sat in the dark of his office for a long time and turned the black poker chip over his knuckles until the chip finally stopped moving, and then he made 2 calls. Not to the men who worked for him in the shadows, the men his father had used, the men who solved this kind of problem quietly and forever. He called a forensic accountant with no connection whatsoever to the Seo family, and a lawyer who had spent an entire career putting men like his father in prison. He wanted it confirmed by hands that could not possibly be his. He wanted, for once in the whole crooked history of the Seo name, the truth to be a thing that did not depend on anyone trusting a Seo. The accountant took 2 days. Then, 2 of Meridian's own bookkeepers, quiet men with families of their own, offered a way out from under it, confirmed the rest. The meetings, the standing orders, the 11 full years of the machine run smoothly under the floorboards of the very company Du Hyun believed he had been scrubbing clean. Kwang Su had not been protecting his dead brother's memory. He had been protecting his dead brother's machine, oiling it, feeding it, and using his living nephew's spotless reputation as the roof over all of it. The cleaning Du Hyun had been so quietly proud of. The closed rooms, the ended arrangements, the good name, had been the perfect cover the entire time. Who, after all, would ever suspect the house that was so publicly, so painfully, tearing down its own dark rooms? He went to his uncle at the office, alone, on a Sunday, with the files under his arm and the recording on his phone. Kwang Su was watering the orchid on the windowsill, humming something old. He had his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a paper bag of pears open on the desk. He smiled when Do-hyun came in, the same warm, tired smile from those 9 days across a table from the lenders, from the worst year of Do-hyun's life, the smile that had once meant, without a word, I've got you. I will not let them take you. Do-hyun he said, setting down the little watering can. You look tired. Sit. Eat something. You never eat. Do-hyun set the files on the desk. He set the phone down beside them, played 11 seconds of the recording, and then he stopped it because he could not stand to hear the word nephew in that voice a second time. Smile did not fall so much as set, like something cooling in a mold, hardening into a shape it would keep. You don't understand what you're holding. all the warmth still there in his tone, which was the most frightening part. If this leaves this room, it doesn't touch only me, Do-hyun. Meridian is inside the company. It's threaded through everything your father built, into the licenses, the financing, the towers, the ground under your feet. You pull this out and half the empire comes out with it. Everything he sacrificed for. Everything I saved for you on my knees for 9 days, so you would have a life. He spread his hands, gentle, reasonable, a man explaining weather to a child. I did it for the family. I did it for you. Burn it. Say nothing. Marry the girl, keep the boy, live a long, quiet life, and let an old man carry what he's already carried this long. No one has to know. No one is helped by this but strangers. I am the only family you have left in this entire world, Do-hyuna. Are you really going to hand me to them over people whose names you didn't even know a month ago? It was the oldest offer there was. Keep quiet. Keep everything. Keep me. Do-hyun thought about a 6-year-old with a slice of apple pointed at the ceiling. Is your uncle a good man? He thought about a broken, frightened father who'd had every earthly reason to stay weak one final time, and had chosen instead, at the cost of his own life, to tell his daughter the truth in 4 lines on a folded note. He thought about a woman standing very straight in a chain store coat, asking him how she was ever supposed to know he wasn't lying. And about the fact that from this exact moment forward, if he did the next thing right, she would never have to wonder that again. You're right that it'll cost me the empire, Do-hyun said. His voice was very quiet and very level and completely his own. You're wrong that it costs me my family. He picked up the phone off the desk. The family I have left is asleep in a building in Summerlin, and I am not going to be the kind of man that little boy asked me about. He turned and walked to the door and opened it. In the outer office stood the forensic accountant, the lawyer, and 2 federal agents who had been waiting since Friday afternoon. No guns, Do-hyun said. To no one and to everyone, to the room and to the ghost of his father, and to 11 years of everything the name had meant. We're not that house anymore. The unwinding took the better part of a year, and Do-hyun paid for every hour of it. Siseo Kwangsu was charged on 19 counts. Racketeering, conspiracy, and, in the death of Marcus Carter, murder for hire. He never once raised his voice through any of it. At the arraignment, he wore his reading glasses and a neat gray suit and looked, to the reporters who filled the gallery, like exactly what he had spent 59 years appearing to be, a mild, tired, courteous old man who brought pears to the office and lost his glasses on top of his own head. That was the part that stayed with Do-hyun, that he would turn over in the dark for years, There had been no monster hiding behind the uncle. The monster and the uncle had been the same man the entire time, all the way down, with no seam between them. There had never been a mask to pull away. There had only ever been a man who had decided, somewhere in the long, quiet middle of his life, that the people at the bottom of the city were a resource to be harvested, and that family was a word you spent on the ones who were still useful. The empire came apart precisely the way Kwangsu had promised it would. Meridian was threaded through everything, and pulling it out meant surrendering licenses, forfeiting assets, and opening 11 years of the CEO company's private books to a government that had wanted them for a generation. Do-hyun did not fight a single piece of it. He signed what they put in front of him. He sold the 2nd tower, and then the 3rd, and watched his name come down off the buildings, one at a time. When the lawyers begged him, genuinely begged him, to at least contest the forfeitures, to save what could still be saved, to keep something, he told them the only thing he wanted saved was the truth, and the truth was not for sale, and they should bill him for the hour and move on to the next document. By the end of it, the house owns a small fraction of what he had started with, he said, to the single reporter he ever agreed to speak to, on the record, that it was the first thing he had ever owned in his life that he was not ashamed of. What he built with what was left was small, and it had a name. The Daniela Carter Restitution Fund was named for a woman Do-hyun never met. Imani's sister, Micah's mother, one of the 400 families Meridian had quietly fed on, a woman who had borrowed money to stay alive a little longer and died still owing it. The fund did exactly one thing, and did it well. It found the people whose debts Meridian had bought and squeezed over the years, tracked them down one household at a time, and it gave the money back. Not forgave, returned. Every dollar of inflated interest, every invented penalty, every payment that had ever been extracted through fear from someone who couldn't fight back. $11.6 million in the end, traced to 312 families across four states, paid out in full over 18 months, and audited from top to bottom by total strangers, so that no one receiving it would ever have to take a sayo at his word again. Doyle Prentice, who had answered so quietly to, quote, testified against him in exchange for a lesser charge, and then vanished into the ordinary gray anonymity of a man nobody needs anymore. There was a woman in Reno, Imani would remember later, near the very end of the 18 months, who did not believe them. She was 71, and she had been paying Meridian a little every month for 9 years, out of a month for not pensions spent that could not spare it, on a debt her late husband had signed for a surgery that hadn't saved him. When Imani called to tell her that the payments had all been unlawful and the money was coming back, $19,000 in change, wired that week, the woman went silent, so long, Imani thought the line had dropped. Then she asked, in a small, careful voice, what the catch was, what she'd have to sign, who she'd owe now. And Imani, who had once stood in a marble office asking a powerful man that exact question, told her the truth. There was no catch, there was no one to owe, the debt had been the crime, and the money was simply hers. It took 3 phone calls before the woman let herself believe it. That, more than the 11.6 million, more than the courtroom, was the thing Imani carried home. Not that the powerful had been punished, that an ordinary frightened person had been handed her own life back and finally allowed to keep it. 6 months after the last tower sold, the Mirador was a different building. The collections division was gone. Not renamed, not relocated, not folded discreetly into something else. Gone. Salad. The graveyard shift had a real break room now, with couches somebody had actually chosen for comfort. And a policy, printed and framed and screwed to the wall where every dealer could see it, that anyone on the floor could walk away from any player who put hands on them or threw a chip with full pay, no write-up, no questions asked, no exceptions. The staff had stopped lowering their eyes when Do-Hyun crossed the floor. Some of them, the newer hires, didn't even know he had ever been called the house at all. He had become, to them, just the quiet man who owned less than the rumors said, who somehow knew every dealer's first name, and who stopped to ask about their kids and remembered the answers. Imani ran the fund. It had surprised no one who knew her that the person best in the world at handing money back to frightened families was a woman who had once stood very straight in a chain store coat and refused to be relieved until she understood the price. She was good at it precisely because she never once, not a single time, let a family feel like they were receiving charity. This was always yours, she told them, in the warm, level voice that had once given nothing away and now, at last, gave everything. We're just the ones returning it. You don't owe us a thing. Not thanks, not anything. That was the whole point. She and Do-Hyun never did have the kind of romance that announces itself, the kind with a moment you could point to. What they had instead was a year of standing where they could each catch what the other one was carrying, and never, not once, dropping it. And it turned out that that was the thing all along. Not rescue, not being saved, not the grand gesture. Just two kids spent their entire lives holding everything up alone, in the dark, discovering slowly that they could set part of it down, and it would still be there, held in the morning. The morning it finally felt permanent was an ordinary one. Micah was 7 now. He had a real dog at last, brown over Do-Hyun's outvoted preference for black, a rescue named Chip who slept diagonally across the whole bed and took up more of it than any of the humans. On a Sunday just past dawn, Do-hyun woke to find that the boy had migrated in during the night, the way he did, and was asleep between him and Amani, one sneaker still stubbornly on. His face turned toward Amani the way children sleep, only when they trust the people nearby with their whole small lives. On the nightstand sat a single black poker chip, the one from his father, from the worst year, the one he had turned over his knuckles 10,000 times in the dark when there was nowhere else for his hands to go. It lay flat and still. He hadn't reached for it in months. He realized, lying there in the gray light, that he had simply stopped needing something to do with his hands in the quiet, because the quiet itself had stopped being a thing he had to survive. He thought about the boys asleep under a blackjack table at 2 p. calls 2:47 in the morning, all those months and a whole lifetime ago, and about the man who had knelt down and given up his armor without understanding why he was doing it. He understood now. Some part of him, moving faster than his mind, before he could talk himself out of it, had recognized the one thing he had been missing his entire life. Not power. He had drowned in power, and it had made him the house. But the ordinary, unglamorous, unrewarded work of protecting someone who would never be useful to him, and choosing to love them anyway, for no reason the ledger would ever accept. They had called him the house because the house always wins and never feels a thing. He lay very still now so as not to wake them. This small, crowded bed, this borrowed diagonal dog, this life that owned almost nothing and was worth more than the whole empire had ever been. The most feared man in Las Vegas closed his eyes in a room with no locks on the doors and did not need them locked. The house had finally lost. For the first time in his entire life, he had a home. So, that's the story, and now I want to hear from you. Do-hyun could have burned the evidence. He could have kept the empire, kept the only blood family he had left in the world, kept his good name, and married the woman and raised the boy anyway. No one would ever have known. Not the courts, not the reporters, not Amani, not the child. He gave up nearly everything he owned to hand strangers back money that was already theirs, and to be able to answer one small boy's question, honestly. Would you have done the same if it were your uncle, your name, your empire on the table? Or is that a price too high to ask of anyone? And here's the question I can't stop turning over, the one that keeps me up. What do we actually owe the people at the very bottom? The ones who can do nothing for us, who can't pay us back, who'll never be useful. Marcus was weak for 4 long years and brave for one single moment, and that one moment cost him his life. Was it enough? Can one true thing at the end redeem all the failures that came before it? Tell me honestly, because I don't know. I read every comment on these, and the ones on stories like this one stay with me for days. If Amani's dignity moved you, or if Micah's question stopped you the way it stopped Do-hyun, cold in your tracks, do me one small thing before you go. Hit that like button so this story finds someone who needs to hear it tonight. Share it with the person you'd stand next to and catch what they're carrying. And subscribe if you're not already here with us, because next week there's another one about a debt that couldn't be paid with money, and I want you here when it drops. Thank you for listening, all the way to the end. That, more than anything else you could do, tells me exactly who you are.